In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how we can take this Pokemon image here, and we're going to use some textures to turn it into something that looks like this. Let's check it out. Welcome to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jason Ortega here with Blended Graphics. If you follow me on Instagram, it would be no surprise to you that I love Pokemon. I love the show and I love the game. And I have been ever since the inception of the original Red and Blue Game Boy games came out. So for today's episode, we're going to actually take that environment that we created yesterday as part of the Creating a Scene series, and we're going to use that as our background for our Pokemon that we're going to create today, which is going to be Milotic. Milotic is one of my favorite water Pokemon, if not maybe my favorite water Pokemon of all time. It really is hard to choose just because there's almost 1,000 of them now. But anyways, I thought this would be a fun character to really bring to life, and we're going to put that right into our scene that we created yesterday. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into this and we'll get going. Okay, let's first bring in our background layer. And we want to remove the Pokemon from our background. And you can use whatever selection process you want. I prefer the pen tool just because I think it gives the most precise extraction. And I'm going to immediately jump towards the cutout image. Now I'm going to pull up our first fish texture layer that we're going to use for the body. And I'm going to hide our Pokemon layer. Use the select subject to extract it from the background and create a layer mask. We'll go back to our Pokemon. And I'm going to use the pen tool to just outline this body here. I want to create a selection of this so that way we can use this when we start applying our fish texture. And once we have a selection, we can fill it with whatever color we want. And now we're just positioning this fish to help us align it with the body. We can right click and do warp so that way we can further kind of get the same curvilinear shape that our Pokemon's got going on. So just bring in some of this area a little bit. Accept that change, and now we can bring that in and paint away some of the spots that we don't want. And essentially this is just going to be a very repetitive process of bringing in the fish, getting it to the angle that we want, constantly brushing away the spots that we don't want, so on and so forth. So we're doing the same thing with this fish now, just warping it to get it to the shape of our lower body here, and painting away those spots using a soft round brush to help blend those textures together. And so you don't have to watch me continue to do the same thing over and over again, I'm going to jump right to our finished product here with the body. I know it's not the prettiest looking thing in the world, but we're off to a good start. From here, we're going to do the same thing with the head, so I'm just using the pen tool right now to create a selection of this. And once we do that, we're going to fill it in with a different color this time. But we're going to repeat the same steps like we did the body. We can go ahead and bring in a new fish layer. And we'll just move this to somewhere that looks good for us. And then we're going to right click and use the warp tool. And essentially we want to fold the fish layer so that it fits nicely around the face. And if you just put the fish there normally and then start painting back in, it doesn't look as good. With us warping it and kind of condensing some of the material, it gives more of that illusion that the skin is rounding out. And now we're going to do the same thing with the tail. So we'll bring back the pencil and we'll just create a selection around the edge of this tail here. And as we do this, I'm actually going to bring in a new fish to use for the tail. I kind of like the texture of this one just a little bit better. And so we're just going to create a selection of the body that we're going to use. And after we create a selection, I'm going to press Command J on that layer to create a copy of just that section. And I've made a couple of duplicates, but now I'm just going to go back and do the same warping technique so that way it kind of folds around the body of the tail and give it some shape. And since that one's in place, we're going to repeat the same process with these next couple of sections with this tail and just finish it out. So one more here. Again, we're going to warp this and just kind of condense it down here so it looks like the scales are starting to get smaller and smaller as you get closer to the fin there. And things are definitely going to look ugly at first, but just hang in there because we're going to polish it up quite a bit. I'm going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer to the body, and we're going to clip it onto that layer, and I'm just going to increase the brightness on this just a little bit here so it doesn't look so dark. I'm then going to use a solid color adjustment layer and just find a nice beige color to work with for the body. And I'm going to put this into one of these blend modes here. So I like this one. We'll decrease the opacity on that. And then I'm going to find a new color to work with on a separate layer that we're also going to attach to the body. And then using a soft round brush, I'm just going to paint some of the edges in just to give it some shape. And then we'll come to the bottom here, do some work around there. We don't want the whole thing to be one color, because then it starts looking very two-dimensional. When we start giving it some shape, it starts having that 3D effect a little bit. And from here, we're going to go to the back part of the body and as well kind of brighten that up a little bit and then switch colors to give it some of that shadow as well. Okay, now I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer and clip it onto the body. And we're going to really increase the shadows here because we're going to add a second round of shadows. So once I have that, I'll press Command-I to invert the mask. And then I'm just going to paint some of this back in, again, to continue to build up on the shaping of our Pokemon. And because this little middle coil section is hard to get to, I'm going to use the pen tool. So that way I'm not painting some more shadow on the bottom part. And now we can be more precise with this, and the overall effect looks really good. Okay, let's go ahead and repeat those same steps with that little back section of the body. We will darken it up with the levels adjustment layer. A little bit more. Okay, Command-I, and we'll invert that. And then we can paint some of that back in. And then we're going to darken up under these areas as well. I'm not really sure what you call them. Ear fins? Who knows? But they look like fins to me, so we're going to darken that area up. And the body's looking really good. So what we want to do now is we're going to go ahead and trace all of those little sections on the tail, and we're going to give each of those a color. And this is what that outcome looks like. So what we're doing now is we're using the hue and saturation adjustment layer because we need to give it the tail that black trim as well as the magenta parts. We already have the blue covered. So this first part here that we're doing is I'm desaturating this entirely so that way we have the black lining. And then I'm going to go back into the red sections and put that into colorize and boost this up a little bit so we have the magenta little pads on the tail. So now we need to invert that mask and command click on the red sections on that layer and then fill that hue and saturation mask with white. And now we just need to repeat those same steps on the black hue and saturation layer mask. Okay, and with everything turned on, now you can see we have all the blue, red, and black. What I'm going to do now is, and you're not going to watch me do it, but I'm going to outline the different parts of the tail fin, assign them colors, so that way we can start working with those sections and give them textures. Okay, and so this is what that looks like. And then I'm going to bring in my goldfish here, and we're going to use its tail to help us out with our fin. So with the lasso tool, I'm just going to outline a selection of this that I want. And then I'm going to press Command-J to load that copy onto a new layer. And then I'm going to Command-Click on the already selected part of the tail fin and apply a layer mask. So that way we just have that little section of the tail fin. Now we need to do the same thing for the other parts, but I'm going to fast forward this section here. All right, so now that we have the fin, we want to find the right color. So using a hue and saturation adjustment layer, we're just going to mess around with the hue and toggle this to somewhere that I think fits really well for our character. So somewhere around here looks good. And we're going to add another hue and saturation adjustment layer because now we need to find the magenta color to use for our center. So somewhere around here. And then I'm going to press Command-I to invert that mask, Command-Click on our other selection, and then fill that with white. Let's now add a solid color adjustment layer. We're going to find a deep blue to work with for our shadows. And we're going to use one of our blending modes to help us out with this. And then we're going to invert that mask. And using the pen tool, we're just going to create a precise area to work with. And we're going to paint back some of this in because in reality, you're going to have shadows here since we have overlapping within the fin. And then I'm going to speed through this and we're going to do the same thing for the rest of this tail. All right, our tail looks good. And we're going to bring back that same goldfish because we're going to use it on our fins for the head. And like I said, I don't know what to call these things. I'm just going to call them ear fins because that's exactly what they look like to me. So let's position this goldfish to where we want it to be. And I'm going to try to align the shadows here to something that I think looks pretty cool. And that would look realistic to me on this Pokemon. Since I don't need the whole image, I'm using the lasso tool just to create a section of it that I want. And then we're going to warp it to a good shape that we can work with. All right, and then we just want to create a layer mask on the selection of that fin. And this is where things started getting very repetitive by just doing this over and over again, using that same texture, and we would just want to fill up all of the area on the fin as possible. So we continue to duplicate, warp it, add a layer mask, and just fill in every single spot of this that we can. And as you can see, we had the shadow going up kind of the middle. So every time I'm adding a new texture, I'm trying to align those shadows so that way it seems like a continuation of the texture and not just something that looks out of place. So we just have this last section here around the eye that we're going to use, and we're going to warp it around there to give it some nice curves. And then use a hue and saturation adjustment layer so that way we can have more of a magenta tone instead of that orange color. And now I'll use levels to darken this up a little bit. And we're going to pull out the highlights here at the bottom. And then we can Command I to invert that mask, and we'll paint some of that back in. And we'll continue to move all around the different areas here, continuing to give these fins some shape. And you can see that this picture is slowly starting to come together. It's starting to look a little bit more realistic and not so ugly as it was a second ago. We're going to add another levels adjustment layer, and we're going to do the opposite this time. Let's increase the highlights, invert that mask, and paint some of those highlights back in on the fin. All right, our fins are looking pretty good. We can now direct our attention towards its antennas. So let's load up this image of this animal. Not sure if it's like a lobster or a crawfish. But anyways, we're going to use the pen tool. We're going to create a selection around its little sea whiskers. All right, now that we have a selection of this, let's press Command T, and we're going to scale this up a little bit and rotate it to where we want it. And I know you can't see the very top of my screen, but it's going to be Edit, and then you'll find the Puppet Warp tool, and that's what we're going to use. Let's put in some little anchor points all around here. And then we're just going to manipulate this so that it lines up with the antenna of our Milotic. All right, so just a couple little more adjustments to go. And we're going to repeat this process over and over again. And once you have that, you should have an image that looks a little something like this. Looks good. I'm a bit distracted by the head, so I'm going to go back to that a little bit, decrease the texture opacity, and on a new layer, I'm just going to paint some of that white beige color back in a little bit, right by the mouth. Just a little bit more. I like that much better. Okay, we can go back to the antennas. Let's add a hue and saturation adjustment level. And then we're just going to play around with those anchors so that way our color matches with the other sections of our Pokemon. And our antennas look kind of funny because they look like they just kind of start there, not really emerging from our body. So I'm creating a selection of that texture, and we're going to add that onto just that bottom part of each antenna. And we're going to warp this and to where we want it to be. And then essentially, we're just going to slowly paint away and have it just fade into the antenna. So something like that is looking good. And we're going to do the same thing for the left antenna. And don't worry, we're going to go back and we'll create some shadows on the edges there so it doesn't look so two-dimensional. So let's paint some of this away. So again, that we give the impression that it's emerging from the skin. And we can add a solid color adjustment layer. And we are just looking for a nice dark brownish color to use as our shadows. And this time, instead of using blend mode, we're going to double click on the layer, come down to the blend if options, and just play around with these anchors to help blend that color in. And then we can Command I to invert that, and we can start painting back some of those shadows to now give our head some shape. All right, so now that we're kind of wrapping up with this, on a new layer, we can press I on our keypad to bring up our eyedropper tool, and we're gonna select that color on the mouth area. And on a new layer, like I said, we're just gonna paint some of this back so that the shadows aren't too overpowering. And yeah, this is looking really good. We're gonna go zoom in a little bit by the fins there, sample that dark shadow color, and we're gonna start painting just under the fin and give that some shadow as well. Right now, the fins kind of look like they're just floating on top of the face, so we're adding these shadows to create that depth. And we can also increase the opacity, and at the top of the head, we can paint just outside of it to create just a little bit darker stroke. And then we can do some work around the antennas, start to give that some shape so it doesn't look so flat as it did before. And once we finish the antennas, we can add a new layer and start doing some work around the eye sockets as well. Okay, we can also add another solid color layer, and we're just gonna change the color up just a little bit, and we're gonna add a bit more indentation and shaping around the eyes and the mouth of our Pokemon here. And maybe just change the color just a little bit more so it matches better. And then we're also gonna decrease the opacity so it's not so prominent. And then we can click back on our layer mask and just erase a little bit more of this. All right, our Pokemon's looking really good at this point. I'm gonna go back over and adding some more shadows along our edges here. And again, to just continue to give it more shape than what we already have going on. I think we have a good starting point, but I just wanna continue to emphasize that even more so than what we already have. So we're just gonna continue to add more shadow by our tail. And we're going to go to the tail fin as well and update some of that and give it again a bit more of a realistic look of where those shadows would be in real life. And as we finish this up, what we're going to do now is we're going to use the pen tool, and essentially what I'm just going to create little selections and cut out little slivers of this tail fin to make things feel a bit more organic and not so perfect. So I'm going to go around the tail to do that, and I will go ahead and speed this part up here. Yeah, I think this turned out really good. I definitely like that feather-like approach, and it makes it feel a bit more organic and not so perfect like I mentioned before, and it's a nice little touch. Okay, we're going to start working on the eyes now, and we're going to basically use a white color to do this, and at 10% opacity, just a couple little dabs on each side, and we're going to start getting this eye some body here. And now we're using the pen tool to create our shape of the Pokemon's iris of the eye. So we'll create a selection of that. And then we're just going to use a sample color from our fin here, and we're going to fill that in with the same magenta color. And let's do the same thing on the left side. Okay, so to make these eyes pop just a little bit more, we're going to change our brush tip here so it's really nice and thin. And we're just going to give a nice little highlight, one on each side. And that will do it. We have now created our Pokemon. From just using that 2D image that we have, we brought this thing to life. And so what we have to do now is we're going to incorporate this with the scene that we made yesterday. So let's jump over into that composition and we'll get to work with that. All right, so now that we're back into our composition that we made yesterday, this next section also involves a great amount of work to be done. And since we're already about 20 minutes into this episode here, I've decided to make the rest of this episode a speed art. I hope you stick around and watch it. Please enjoy, and I will see you at the end. And here is our final product. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for sticking around to watch this. If you want to see more videos like this, please hit that subscribe button and click that bell to stay notified. I will be doing more Pokemon tutorials in the future. In the meantime, thanks a lot, take care, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.